Hello Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt, and today we're going to be talking about the new rulebook for Paizo's Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Book of the Dead. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. So, the Book of the Dead. Been waiting for this one for a while. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a big old book full of a whole bunch of undead stuff. If that sounds exciting to you, then definitely stick around. So, the book is broken up into 5 chapters. The first chapter is going to deal all about living undead options, typically for fighting undead. One thing before we dive into that, though, is that this book is written from the perspective of a wizard named, I believe it's pronounced Geb. Wizard Lich. Some sort of undead thing. So what he did was he wrote a whole bunch of stuff about undead and eventually became a Lich himself. And this is sort of like a memoir that he's written. And you can sort of treat him as an unreliable narrator sometimes. All of the chapters begin with in-universe writing from Geb. He is arrogant, and he has a sort of academic view of the subject matter, meaning not a lot of emotion when he's talking about, the ramifications of these sorts of things. He often glosses over the moral dilemmas and the uglier downsides of undeath to focus on what he views as the upsides, which is strangely a lot of productivity and things like that. Throughout, he has very few nice things to say about anyone or anything that isn't Geb himself or his country. But the authors did a really good job, and it's obvious that we're not supposed to agree with most of what he says, at least not the tone that he uses to say it. He's out of touch, and while he's painstakingly thorough in his understanding of the subject matter, his viewpoint is skewed. So there's lots of sanctimonious snark, like this snippet here. So, fun Geb reading aside, let's get into what's actually in the chapters. The first chapter is Prayers for the Living. As I said, this is sort of undead fighters is what this covers. We get an overview of some undead hunting organizations as well as a number of backgrounds, both common and rare. Willing Host is the standout. It's sort of like a light bones oracle. You can ask a wandering spirit for help, usually with a skill check sort of thing. But then you are beholden to it. You owe it a favor in return, and you have 24 hours to complete that favor before you start to suffer fatigue, as it's sort of chattering and telling you, basically just harping on you to please do the thing. We had an agreement. Why aren't you doing the thing? Now, the thing is usually something quite simple. See a particular place, local, or, visit a relative, or, even, it's been so long, my favorite food was, tiramisu. Let's go eat some tiramisu. It can be as simple or as weird and complex as your GM determines. Now, until you do that task, you cannot use this ability again. So it's a lot of fun, and it's sort of a little bit of a give and take situation. We also get a lot of new undead fighting items, from the alchemical to the magical, including a new material called peachwood that cuts through undead enemy resistances. The standouts for me are a Castlevania-inspired whip. It's literally got a stake on the end of it, and a litmus test, an alchemical litmus test, where you can identify what brand of undead has interacted with the tested material, whether that's soil or, a body or whatever. You can run these tests. One other little thing that's awesome is there's a book of natural, remedies and folk cures, and while for the most part there's nothing really hard there, it's a lot of good inspiration for a GM to make those mean something, like mirrors and things like that. There's no hard rules about mirrors for, vampires, for example, at least not that I'm aware of that I've seen, but your GM, or you as the GM, may decide that mirrors do play a part. These could be left completely as folk remedies, red herrings for your players, or they could be things that your players could ask about, find out about, and give them slight situational edges when they're facing these terrible foes. Now, let's jump into the undead fighting archetypes that we got. The first is the Exorcist. The Exorcist gathers restless spirits into an object and gets feats on what they can do. Basically, different ways to make use of them before releasing them. And that's it's not as cruel as it sounds. The idea is you're actually helping to release them in a way they may not have gotten to. You're just channeling it and gaining abilities from it. You're sort of a symbiotic sort of thing. These act a lot like focus spells, which is cool because they are not focus spells. Therefore, they would stack and be usable alongside your focus spells. They recharge after battle with 10 minutes, and you can... So if you've used one in a fight or in a situation, it's very easy to get it back again. It's not like a once per day sort of thing. And again, just like your focus spells, you can create a character that has a lot of renewable resources in fights, which is very fun. The Hallowed Necromancer can create hallowed ground and emit a consecrated aura to control the battlefield against undead hordes, and that's really like where they shine. As many undead as possible, they are going to do a good job of controlling, not taking over the undead, but controlling what they can and cannot do by creating negative reinforcement for them. They don't want to go here, so... But it changes also how you, or it also gives you a bunch of spells and sort of changes how you interact with them. It varies if you're a spontaneous or a prepared caster. Prepared casters can take 10 minutes of downtime and choose from this small list of thematic spells and swap out a spell that they did prepare for one of those that they didn't, which is very good. And a spontaneous caster actually just gets to pick 2 of those spells to be bonus signature spells. If you have played a spellcaster in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you know how cool both of those things are. There's even also a little bit of poaching focus spells from other classes as well. So it's really just, and it plays into the fact that it's designed to start from many sources. You might start as a cleric or, an arcane spellcaster, whichever the case may be. And then you can use the tools from your class that already exist, but you can also poach them from the other with, again, the arcane, the wizard and the cleric being the classic starting points for a necromancer. This Hallowed Necromancer shares those same origins for this archetype. That doesn't mean you couldn't definitely get there from other places. It's just those are typically the primary 2, the ones with the best tools for it. Now, Soul Wardens are dedicated to seeing the cycle of life and death preserved within the world. They act as martial guardians against the dead, gain access to a familiar template that if they want it, as well as some unique abilities and a weapon or item that glows in the presence of undead. They're mostly focused on protection, but they do get access to add some damage to both spells and weapon attacks against undead. So very thematic. The Soul Warden and its abilities seem to like a great alternative or a complement even to a champion if you're playing in an undead heavy campaign and you want to get some means to fight undead without necessarily going full champion, or again, just doubling down on that theme. Undead Slayers fill the Van Helsing niche and sort of kind of the Buffy as well. They can identify undead as part of rolling initiative, and then at later levels later feats they can actually roll intimidation as part of all that. They're adept at fighting frightening, even mindless undead, so that intimidation will work on things that normally would be immune. Even things that don't have brains, if they're undead, they know to avoid this character. They can resist negative energy, and they have ways to add damage to undead or bypass their resistances, or both. And they can set up a safe house. And this is a really cool thing where they sort of designate an area about 20 feet by 20 feet by 20 feet, and they can return to it and use it to restock their items, including things that they don't actually have in their possession, following the rules of the Prescient Planner feat, although a little bit expanded and specific. So it's really cool and really flavorful and a great addition to a team if you're in a setting that is overrun by undead. You've got this place that's hard for them to find, that is safe, where you can resupply. Super cool. Chapter 2, Hymns for the Dead. This is the largest chapter in terms of player options, and it's all about undead players and companions and features where not necessarily evil or anything, but definitely not so much fighting undead as being and joining them, for better or worse. What's interesting is we start out with some new necromancy class feats, just general necromancy class feats. What that means is, and it specifically says, GMs are encouraged to offer any classes that meet the prerequisites for these feats to take them. Very similar, we've seen this before with the Magical Trickster archetype, I believe it was called, that was designed to be a way to get extra variation out of your spells. Like there's 3 different feats for it for Fireball to change how Fireball works. And it was said there that if you're players have access to these spells, you could let them take these feats. It's not really going to hurt anything to let them do that. I do it at my game. You should do it at yours. Really, anything that is going to add thematic and impactful feats to spellcasters, probably a good thing. In particular, these feats are about controlling undead. Surprise. Now let's jump to these spooky character options and archetypes. The Reanimator is the quintessential necromancer, getting access to the universal feats I just mentioned, as well as lots of feats to give tools to create and command dead. Most notable is a way to have 2 undead minions simultaneously, giving them commands at the same time. Not only is this very difficult to do, getting 2 summoned minions at once, but being able to command them both at the same time is a huge action economy hack, even to the niche ways that you can do it that already exist. This is just better. There's also a focus spell to raise any fallen creature and in combat. Those that don't know, summoning undead is one thing. Raising dead is a ritual that takes a lot of time. This is an in-combat, it's 3 actions, but it is an in-combat way to do it, something we just don't really have yet. Next up is the Undead Master. This is basically the Beastmaster archetype, which is all about gaining a companion, but this is focused on the undead companions. And we're going to talk about those undead companions in a minute. But just like the Beastmaster, they can actually acquire a sort of stable, a rotating cast of undead that they can swap between of these companions. It's a really cool and thematic archetype. The Beastmaster is a great archetype. This seems to overlap almost entirely with it, just a couple of more thematic feats that are more particular to undead. So on the subject of undead pets, we're going to go through them in the order that they're presented in the book. We get a new Undead Eidolon for summoners. The special partners of the summoner class, Undead Eidolon, they come in Brute and Stalker options with different stat spreads based on those choices. The Eidolon uses negative healing, but in many ways, due to their connection with the summoner, they're actually still not considered full undead. Now, what's cool with that is if your undead is up on the front lines, if your minion is up on the front lines, battling, living creatures, you can toss out, you or a party member can toss out a harm spell, healing your Eidolon and harming the enemies. Or somebody in the back line can heal you. And what's cool is you can functionally that way benefit from both positive and negative healing at the same time. It's the only way I know of to really do it. And it's just because of the way that you and your Eidolon share an HP pool. It's a fun, weird little thing that I'm sure some players will find a great use for. So while it doesn't have the immunities, it does get some bonuses against the things that undead are typically immune to. It has a special drain life activity that's sort of like a power attack, but it also gives some temporary HP to the Eidolon. And it gets rejuvenation, which is an ability where once per day, if the summoner is downed, it can, at the beginning of its turn, if it begins its turn with a dying condition, it will pop up, summon back, it will revive itself with 3 times your level HP, resummon the Eidolon, and then get all of its actions to start its turn. That is absolutely wild. It's very powerful. Next, for that Undead Master, or just anybody theoretically who can get an animal companion, we have Undead Companions. These have slightly reduced ability scores to account for their unique senses or other abilities. And the mindless options, Skeleton and Zombie, I believe are the only ones. They pay for those immunities by limiting their free actions, because they do get a lot of immunities. Being mindless, like anything that controls minds, fear, we talked about it before, doesn't affect them, and they're paying for that. Basically, because they're mindless, if you have feats that allow your companion to take an action without being commanded each round, I think anytime you get to mature companion and beyond, it will, but it can only do the last thing you commanded it to. You can't functionally give it new orders each round for free, but it will continue to follow the same orders each round, just as a little, because of the mindless trait giving it some immunities. Other options include a ghost that can be an animal or a humanoid and can frighten foes with like a whale, a skeletal mount, or the skeletal servant that we meant, both of which can just be disassembled and put into a bag and carried somewhere. If you've ever been playing an animal companion and your GM says, oh, can't take that in. The areas are too tight here. You have to leave it behind. You just say, well, give me a minute. Let me take them apart, and we'll put them back together. And then when we get inside, we'll let them out. So it's a really fun little thing. There's also the vampiric animal that can smell blood up to 120 feet away and do a sort of can cause bleed damage, and then do a sort of blood frenzy thing where it can feed on and gain temporary HP from any creature that's already bleeding. Finally, the zombie has an extra strong bite if it's already grappling a target. Next, let's talk about the Undead Familiars. We get a specific selection of familiars that can gain special access to unique abilities. We've seen this before with these specific familiars. Usually you have to have a certain number of familiar master abilities to spend, so oftentimes these will require that you be either a familiar master archetype, a familiar thesis wizard, or a witch. Any of those should get you plenty to pick these from, but there are ways to get access to some of them. Not all of them. Some of them, you pretty much got to be a witch or a familiar master. But it's limited access, but they're very cool and very flavorful, and these are no exception. Options include the Crawling Hand, which can act as a valet, which is a very popular familiar ability, and it can use its reaction. It gets a reaction. Not a lot of familiars do. It can use its reaction to aid an ally's attack roll. You do still have to give it a command to have it spend the action to ready to aid, but it's still a really nice thing, especially for those casters that feel like their spells aren't hitting quite enough. You've got a guaranteed somebody who can help you with an aid action. Very good. The Old Friend is the spirit of a faithful pet that has passed and has returned to stay by your side even in death. I'm not crying, you're crying. Also, it can turn invisible and fly. It's really cool. It's very sad, but it's really cool, and I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate it. Man. There's also something called a Polong, which is a sort of evil little spirit trapped in a glass bottle, and it can actually possess a nearby creature, an adjacent creature, not to control them, but just to sort of spy out of their eyes for either a minute or 24 hours, depending on how you do on the check. Again, it can't control it, but it can ride along and spy, and if it goes outside the distance, whenever the effect ends, it automatically goes back to the jar. So don't worry about severing the link and ruining your familiar. They thought of that. Finally, the Talking Head is exactly what it sounds like. It can be a skull or a more meaty head. It's got a lot of knowledge skills, which are very cool, which means it can assist you in research and things like that very well. And cantrip connection and speech are its abilities, but it's specifically noted as being very helpful, but often annoying or even abrasive, because it just kind of never stops and is probably always judging you for doing things wrong. If you like Dresden Files or Futurama, I'm sure you can have a lot of fun with that. The chapter also contains info on some new and returning deities that might favor characters who summon, control, or are undead. The most noticeable mention is Orcus, who hasn't been covered yet, but we also get Set, who is from the Osirian pantheon, which we haven't had yet. He was missed in Gods and Magic. We didn't see it. Now we have it. Finally, we get into the section on actually playing as an undead. This includes some RP tips and guidance, as well as a skill feat, so that you can stitch together undead using the medicine skill, which, with downtime healing being a thing, you really want to have good access, and this helps a lot. I would say, and I think it even says, if you're playing in an all-undead campaign by default, like where everybody's already, different types of undead, you might just include that for free. Now, undead characters. There's a basic umbrella section of undead benefits that are laid out and apply to all the options, as well as advanced options that you can purchase, advanced just general undead that you can purchase with feats in most of these, I believe all of these archetypes. As expected, some abilities that NPC undead possess are either toned down or, part of the advanced, you're not going to get them from the get-go. But it is still a lot. There's still a lot of things that you're going to get in terms of benefits from being an undead. Most of these undead are presented as archetypes, which both make sense narratively and from a power standpoint. It'd be very hard to give some of these. I mean, we can just compare the vampire and the dhampir. The dhampir gets very watered down versions of the things that the vampire is now getting in full effect, either earlier, stronger, or with added effects. So that kind of tells you why these are archetypes instead of ancestries or versatile heritages. But again, it also makes sense narratively, as oftentimes, somebody will be an adventurer or a person in the world before becoming these creatures. That said, there is additional option for letting players begin with these, even if you start at level 1, to still begin with these undead archetypes, with the caveat that they're going to lock in to spend their second level feat, whether it's free archetype feat or their actual class feat buying the archetype. But either way, they have earmarked it. They have agreed that they're going to pay that price. You're just giving them the benefits earlier. We see this is how class archetypes work. So nothing really new about it. It's just not a class archetype doing it. And it's a really nice thing to allow people, if they just have to be an undead from the get-go, now they can. One final thing, all undead have a craving. Instead of needing to eat and drink, they must satisfy this need. It varies for each one, and we'll go through as we do it. First up is Ghost. Ghosts have a lot of special rules and around items, attacks, and how they can interact with the material world, which makes sense. It has a large section on working with your GM to choose a bound site and your unfinished business, which both matter for the story of your character as well as some of your abilities, like where you reform after being destroyed if you take that ability. Ghosts can gain flight, resistances, and spooky moans, as well as an ability to pass through walls. Ghosts' craving is to settle their unfinished business. Now, one thing that is cool to note is, like we've seen with some of the other flying archetype or ancestries and stuff before, there is some options for if you want to start with those early, if it's important to the character to have those thematic abilities for a ghost. Some guidance on GMs who want to enable that early and what to watch out for and things like that, which is a thing that Paizo does a lot. They say, hey, this is our recommendation for this ability, but if you have something else in mind, they do a really good job of letting you know what to watch out for, what pitfalls might come up, or how you can avoid them. Ghouls. I love ghouls. They're one of my favorite monsters to use, especially at low level. I love them. Ghouls' craving is fittingly for the flesh of freshly dead sapient creatures. They can subsist on non-sapient creatures, but they sure do prefer the sentient meat. A ghoul who has satiated its cravings can use special versions of its feats that are a little bit more powerful, but doing so makes them regain their hunger anew, and they need to feed again. They can eat flesh as an action to satiate themselves on a kill mid-fight, but their feats provide extreme mobility and gaining stench and paralysis that you associate with ghouls. It's a really cool package. If you don't mind, being a stinky, tooth-filled monster with a giant tongue, I think it's cool. Try it. Next up, we have Lich, a classic big bad. Unlike the other undead archetypes that kick in early, the Lich requires 12th level. So no starting at level 1. Oh yeah, I'll pay when I get to level 12. Not doing that. It also requires 6th level spells and a whole bunch of other requirements around the process of becoming a Lich, creating a soul cage to house your soul, and how you have to power up the ritual. It's pretty vague. It leaves the details up to you and the GM a little bit. But the specifics are that it's terrible. So, they can, it's a very powerful thing. It's a very big buy-in to get it. I would not recommend, I guess I can't say that. I was going to say I wouldn't recommend, having players that start as Liches, because then you're going to miss out on watching them pay all their gold and do all these horrible things to become Liches. But again, I suppose if you're doing an all undead or all evil undead or even just all evil, sure, start at level 12, be a Lich already. I guess it's fine. But I feel like so much of the fun is making the player jump through the hoops to become a Lich. But anyway, they do get they become very good prepared casters is what they do. They can gain ways to cast spells that they didn't prepare in a pinch. A couple of ways like drain bonded item, but more they get a gem that they can also drain, but it's got a smaller number of options. They can pick up a special unarmed attack, which if you've ever been hit by a Lich, you know that can be nasty, and a frightful aura. They also, their craving is knowledge, and so they must spend some time. It doesn't really specify how they gather that, but it just means that they got to open a book at least a couple times a day, I guess. Now we're on to mummies. Mummy are very tough. it turns out. They have a weakness to fire due to their dry skin, but they automatically gain toughness, and they get a d6 lethal unarmed attack, which is very cool. And they are bound to a terrain, the terrain that dominated where they were made, where they became mummies. There's some side notes on creatures that willingly became mummies through this sort of like spiritual mummification process, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly. And, you know, that we're alive. The whole thing is like you're alive as long as possible in the process. And then there's also people who just fell into swamps and mummified naturally. And, you know, so you can really set up your origin there. But in any case, you're going to be associated with a type of terrain. And those are Arctic, desert, mountain, or swamp. A wide range of feats exist to take advantage of your bounded terrain, including becoming full-blown sandstorm mummy face, like some of you probably are imagining when I say you can be a mummy. You can drain moisture from the living to both heal yourself and pass as a living creature yourself. You can, you know, when you deal damage to them, you can absorb their moisture and, you know, fill out your mummified face and pass for a regular living human. There are some buffs for your unarmed and weapon attacks, and you can grapple foes with your wrappings as a reaction. It's really cool, some of the abilities, and if you're hearing that, like you can grapple them with your, that sounds a little silly, I promise you, there's a lot more silly stuff to come. It's not all silly, you don't have to be silly, but there's some really fun tools here. You know, the designers knew if you're playing a campaign with a bunch of undead, you're probably going to be you're probably not, I don't want to pigeonhole anybody and say you're probably not taking the story very seriously, because that's definitely not true. But I do feel like an all evil or an all undead campaign lends itself to a certain amount of mischief, and having feats and abilities that live up to that mischief and help you feel as silly as your backstory may be. You know, spooky, scary skeletons, as it were. It's really fun to have those options and to see those little nods to silliness in there, in what is otherwise a very serious, spooky book. Next up is the vampire. Now, the vampire has vulnerability to sunlight that can get them killed very quickly, and they have a revulsion to garlic and non-evil holy symbols. They have a lot of restrictions. They crave blood, and they get a special action to drink it, even in combat, so that's nice. They can gain a climb speed. They can speak to rats, bats, and wolves. They can change into a bat or mist. They can bind themselves to a coffin to cheat death and heal themselves, you know, throughout the day if your coffin is conveniently located. And they can dominate the weak will. Basically, it's the total package of classic vampire abilities, and the combination of the mist form and the coffin makes them very hard to kill, which if you've ever been a GM and run vampires, or had a GM run vampires for you, you know how annoying it is when you think you've done it and then they mist away like freaking Dracula. Zombies share a lot of similarities to ghouls in that they also crave flesh and specifically organs, but they do suffer from rapid deterioration, which is sort of like the opposite of the opposite but the same as the ghouls satiate. So basically they need constant upkeep or they start to fall apart, they become slowed. This can be done as part of your daily preparations or with 10 minutes of downtime, so it's not necessarily going to be that restrictive for you. But like ghouls, you can expend your fullness and you can gain the deteriorated condition by using enhanced versions of some of your abilities. A couple cool things: zombies can fight just as good while prone as standing. They tend to have a lot of cool, there's a feat that gives them a lot of cool bonuses for laying prone. They can charge forward to grapple and bite, all in 2 actions. That's fun. They can gain knowledge from eating brains temporarily, especially with a bigger bonus if the brain had particular knowledge of the subject they're rolling knowledge checks on. They can resist pain, they can remove limbs that remain under their control, and they can shrug off lethal blows once per hour. Sort of like the orc thing, you can stay standing when the blow would have dropped you. Very cool stuff. Now the skeleton. I saved this one for last. I took it out of the alphabetical order just because it isn't an archetype. It's a little different. It's a full ancestry. Skeletons are surprisingly charming and quicker of body than mind, but they are, you know, they're skeletons. All skeletons don't have enough flesh for their original ancestry to play much of a part anymore, but they can take feats to reclaim some of their former abilities. and from their ancestry and their former life as well. Their heritages are really just generalizations because of this. An elf and a human skeleton really aren't particularly different. So they're very generalized. You have fodder skeletons that are a little faster. Sturdy skeletons have a little more HP. You have the compact skeletons that can fit in small places, climbing or crawling and squeezing and stuff like that. And they were probably once halflings. The sturdies were probably like orcs, dwarves, that sort of thing. And then there's monstrous ones, which were bestial or monstrous humanoids. Now, I don't know for sure if I did a couple of passes. The book's only been out about 24 hours, so I haven't fully digested everything. But it seemed like if you wanted to be like an undead bear, you could be. This isn't the weirdest thing. We've certainly had the beastkin that can sort of run around as animals, and the hunter version of the automaton ancestry can be quadrupedal beast form. But it didn't really specify, but it also specifically said maybe they were a beast, and so that has me thinking. But I guess it could be magical beast like an owlbear or something that's still going to be an upright sort of thing. But I don't know. I'd probably allow it. Skeletons can collapse into a pile of bones when critically hit to reduce the damage. They can play dead to pass as a normal skeleton, just, toss themselves in a body heap and overhear whoever's throwing other bodies into the body heap. They can pull off their arm and use it as like an extension to add reach to a one-handed melee weapon, which is very fun. They can shoot their bones as arrows, doing a little damage to themselves for a little extra damage on the attack. Got to gather them after, but you can bind yourself to a weapon or object, so basically that you attune to during your daily preparations every day, and it's almost like a save point. If you die that day, you can sort of reform around that weapon that you've bound yourself to. That's a really cool thing, and you may have noticed that almost all of these undead, I believe all of them actually, have some means to cheat death a second time, because they've already cheated death sort of once, right? But they have ways to stick around. And that's because one of the problems with being an undead is once you reach 0 HP, you are out. So they wanted to give some tools to allow players to keep going, because there's no, down on the ground, wounded, waiting for somebody to heal you. It's a very different ballgame. One other thing, they can become a skeletal animal, which supports my theory of them being a big beastie animal, or a swirling swarm of bones, which is the first time that we've had a way for a player to become a swarm. Maybe, do we have a worm? No, we have a worm that walks monster, but not archetype. Yeah. So as far as I know right now, correct me down in the comments if I'm wrong, but our first way for a player to become a swarm. Very fun. This chapter closes up with some advice on running ghost stories to take advantage of Pathfinder2e's excellent haunt mechanics, as well as to inspire your ghost PC. As such, with that, we get 25 new haunts, both simple and complex, which is great. I love haunts. Can't have too many haunts. Chapter 3 is the Grim Crypt. It's 50 new and revamped undead. We also get new and updated rules for creating undead NPCs of different types in the form of templates. We've had templates before. We've even had, vampire templates and things like that. No, werewolf templates. Maybe we've had vampire templates as well. But these are just a little series of adjustments that you can apply to almost any stat block that you find in the bestiary or a NPC entry or whatever from the game mastery guide or from an adventure path, and you can just sort of tack these changes on, go down the list, change the changes that tell you to change, and now you have this thing that fits the theme, has some of the mechanics, while still being within the encounter building rules. It's a really cool thing that Pathfinder does, and the more of these we get, the better. I mean, if you think of the way we consider versatile heritages as like multiplying the number of ancestries we have available, and archetypes multiplying the number of classes we have available, this is the same thing. Every one of these templates we get, it multiplies the number of monsters in the bestiary that you have. So, very cool. Just keep throwing them at us, Paizo, please. Standouts of the new and revamped creatures for me include the Cadaverous Rake, which is a sort of fencer, swashbuckler type, very big, boisterous undead who thinks that they are, Geb's gift to swordplay. And as such, if they encounter a similarly skilled, in their eyes at least, fencer or swordsperson, and they decide that and if for whatever reason both escape the fight and live to tell about it, that cadaverous rake may start following that player, or NPC as it may be, around for another duel. This means they could pop up at really inopportune times, or they might pop up at an opportune time because they stop something else from killing you because they want the chance to do it. So a lot of fun there for the GM to consider and how to use it. So I just thought that one really struck out to me as being fun. And the art is great. The art through all of this book is great, but we'll get to that at the end. But yeah, it's really cool and just really weird. And again, like weird little subtly silly things. No, not even so subtle, but weird little silly things in this book that I really appreciate. I also like the Death Coach. It's a haunted coach being pulled by skeletal horses. There's cool purple fire. And they have to fight it. They have to fight the ghost coach. I like it. I don't know. We also get some new variations of classics, some new options and modifications that you can make to Grave Knights and Liches and things like that to customize them for the particulars of your needs. We also, one thing that's really cool is we got a few new types of Liches, so that, because right now I think the Lich is a level 12 creature, and you have to be level 12 to even become a Lich as a player. So that sort of, player and monster building rules, not at all the same, but it did sort of feel like, wow, every Lich I've ever fought is like new to this. So now we have some higher level, up to 19th level Liches, so you can really threaten and use them as, full campaign villains. Chapter 4 is Lands of the Dead. This is Galarian setting places where undead can be found in larger quantities than normal for a fantasy tabletop RPG, but it includes plot hooks to inspire you, how undead work within each place, like Geb, where they're just part of society and stuff like that, and all of these things so that you can, if you're playing in Galarian, have an idea of where to set your adventure and stuff like that. But if you're not playing in Galarian, I always say you can look at these as inspiration for real-world towns and how they may or may not deal with undead. If you are going to have, a spooky town, you might as well use all the published stuff on Ustalav to your advantage because it's good stuff and it saves you time. So just because you're not playing in Galarian, don't just skip this chapter. Again, the voice of Geb adds his own less than objective slant on things, being downright dismissive of the world-ending threat that is Tar Bafon, who he seems to view as a talented amateur who only got as far as he has through Urgathoa's favor. You talk about a hot take, right? But, that's Geb. Finally, Chapter 5 is the March of the Dead. It's a 20-page adventure that can play differently each time for good replay value. The less said about any adventure, the better, to avoid spoilers and stuff like that. But I will say, due to the dark subject matter, special care is recommended. There's a sidebar. Make sure that your players know what they're signing up for, or to know what you need to adjust or gloss over in order to make sure that it's a fun, engaging environment for everybody and that nobody's being exposed to anything that will diminish their enjoyment. Because it is a game, and at the end of the day, we're all here to have fun, right? Okay, so what's the verdict? I think this is a must-have book if you plan to use undead in any capacity, really, beyond, if they're going to feature any more than the average, then you should probably really think about getting this book. If you have players that want their characters to be undead or have an undead feel, this is sort of the only game in town for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Like Secrets of Magic and Guns and Gears, this is part of the new wave of rulebooks designed to be patched onto the core, which is, the core rulebook, GMG, the bestiaries, and the APG. That is the complete Pathfinder 2nd Edition. That's everything that is complete. And then Guns and Gears, Secrets of Magic, and Book of the Dead, and then Dark Archive, which is coming later this year. I believe it could have been delayed, but I think it's still coming later this year. But these are all just patch add-on books that add a whole bunch of thematic stuff to your game. So if you're playing within that theme, it's a no-brainer. You want to get this book, you want to tell your players they can use this book. But even if you're not playing heavy thematic, you just want to have all the options, it's great there too. But again, if that's what you're doing, you need this book. A couple of things. One, I would have really liked this book about a year and a half, 2 years ago when I was doing my big undead heavy campaign, but that's fine, Paizo. I understand. I didn't check with you for the schedules. I apologize. The other thing that's weird, but not necessarily a bad thing, is if you're looking for new spells, there aren't any new spells in here aside from the focus spells that come with the archetypes and stuff like that. There is sort of kind of new expanded functionality to the spells in the form of we've got a bunch of new undead that you can summon and raise and stuff like that. But as far as actual new spells, there's none of those. But that's really the only thing that we didn't get a little something of, so we'll forgive it. And I believe there are new spells coming with Knights of Last Wall in May. I think that's coming, so... is it May? Yeah, I think it's May. So, look for that book. It's going to have probably a very different feel on it. But for Book of the Dead, I think there's a lot of content here. I think it's really cool. And the art. The art is... I say this about, I think, almost every book that we do, but the art, so good. It just never stops giving. There's a picture of a goblin riding a skeletal mount that is not a horse, it's a skeletal frog. And if that doesn't appeal to you, I don't know how to talk to you. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you check out the book, and let me know what kind of characters you're excited to build down in the comments, or come hang out in our Discord as well. We really appreciate you watching. Welcome to the collective. We'll see you next time. Bye.